Hello, and welcome to another episode of Father and Joe. I am Joe Rockey, here with Father Boniface Hicks. And Father, in the last episode, you gave a great answer about how you were about to do something really, really important and meaningful, but you had your own kind of doubts and questions about going about that. And 6 months or so, ballpark, you had the conversation saying you got to pray like a pirate. You got to be able to go to the Bible, take your own personal emotions, relate to Jesus, and do it slowly and thoughtfully and reflectively. Don't try to rush through the conversation or the thought. And I'm going through, probably this is going to span across a chapter and a half or so of the Gospel of Mark, and starting with where Jesus sends his apostles out in groups of two to go out and teach. And then the next main segment is kind of a background of what's going on in the world in which these guys are living in, which is John the Baptist gets assassinated, for lack of a better way of saying it. And then all of the apostles come back to Jesus, and Jesus has a conversation with all of them in general. But the one thing that came back with them, some of them are telling stories about how this town was awesome, how this town was horrible. How did you guys deal with this? How did you do with that? Essentially teaching his employees, for using my own business terms about this. But what immediately comes after that is the crowd of 5,000 people engulfing the private place where Jesus was having essentially his debriefing with the apostles in an environment where the last major teacher just got assassinated. We still know this is something important in coming to Jesus. And at least in Mark, one of the apostles makes the observation of, all right, everyone's here. Now, logistically, what do we do with them? Like, we need a year and a half or half a year's worth of food just to take care of these people. What is it that we do? Obviously, we did something kind of right. I mean, we're just having this conversation about things I said right in this village or this town. There's things we wish we would have done better. We weren't perfect about this, but there's still this massive following. And that's obviously where Jesus performs the miracle of taking virtually no food and feeding all of this gathering. And as I was growing up, first off, it was never put in this order as it is in the Bible. It was always looked at in the piecey parts of the various parts of the Bible, which I understand doing. But the emphasis was always on that single moment of Jesus performing the miracle of of feeding everyone, which, again, not trying to denigrate that at all, but looking at it from the perspective of the apostles. Some of them are sitting there thinking they completely messed up because they didn't have the best story and experience compared to the other ones talking about how they did going out teaching Jesus to the villages and to all that. Some of them are dwelling upon their problems and their mistakes, wish they would have said this, wish they would have been treated differently. All these natural things that happen to everyone in human life that, for better or worse, those specific details aren't brought up in the Bible. But that's what Jesus is talking to them about. And then they look out in this crowd, and I'm sure every single one of them saw at least one or two people that they just reflected upon in their journey. Like, I guess I did make a difference. And now that I did this greatness, now I can't take care of these people. And going back to the message that you just said, complete reliance upon Jesus will take care of everyone. And I know from going to the Holy Thursday Mass enough to know that that's not when the Eucharist was created. But in some ways, I really think that is the miracle when you look in totality, that teaching that you guys are going to be able to take care of this. Yes, I'm going to give you more tools later. I'm going to breathe the Holy Spirit upon you later. But in that moment of, all of them had doubt. I should have said this. I should have done this differently. And no doubt, none of them were perfect. But to look at that event, seeing everyone come as we're comparing ourselves to essentially the other priest of the moment, and look at it. That's just something that I looked at in that period. I know that we don't have a lot of time for this episode. I just did a great buildup across 4 major sections of the Gospel of Mark there. But I bring this up for 2 reasons. A, I think it's very important to slowly look at everything, but look at it the order that the Gospels present, because I never would have had this thought or feelings had I just done the way I always done it. This is the piecemeal you get on Sunday, the part of the Gospels, and quite frankly, they bounce across Gospels from weekend to weekend. But actually going through it methodically and coming up with different thoughts and looking at it from different perspectives, because it's just something that, like I said, it dawned on me, Father. It's something that after talking about the Eucharist and how important it is essential to life, and these are the people who are around him the most. They just went through their first teaching test, and their first reaction is, we're not able to handle this many people. We don't have a half a year's worth of wages to go feed all these people. And that's just one meal. How are we going to do this for forever? It's daunting. So, Father, I know that's a very broad and long startup for what we normally do here in the episode, but I wanted to let you know that's kind of where I was at coming into this episode.
Yeah, there's an endless amount that we learn from Jesus's pedagogy, the way that he forms his disciples, preparing them for various future revelations. So preparing them for the Last Supper through the multiplication of the loaves. And those connections are certainly very intentional. In John's Gospel, that's the only presentation of the there is no words of institution used. So the Eucharistic theology that comes through in John chapter 6, the bread of life discourse, is his only reference to the Eucharist in the whole gospel. He doesn't have the institution narrative from the Last Supper. But Jesus is already preparing faith in his disciples. And that's always what he's doing with us as well. That's why it's in addition to the National Eucharistic Congress, we could spend some time talking about the Encounter Conference that I attended a couple of weeks before that, where prayer for signs and wonders, for healing miracles takes place, and where a number of healings took place and continue to take place. Why does Jesus continue to heal? Why does Jesus continue to work miracles? Again, he's stirring faith, and the apostles needed to learn that he can provide, and he can provide in miraculous ways, and he provides around people's hunger, physical hunger, and then also the hunger for life, for love, for meaning. And ultimately, he answers all of our hunger with his own self, with his own body and blood. And he makes that gift to us in the fullest expression of love on the cross, and he memorializes that we can continue to receive from it in the Eucharist. But the multiplication miracle was Jesus already stirring faith in the hearts of his disciples, and he engages them in questions beforehand. It's sometimes we need to give an answer before we recognize the significance of our wrong answer and Jesus's right answer. But he asks a question and invites them to give it their best shot, and they answer from a natural analysis, which is totally fair. And then he takes them to the next level, that with him, all things are possible. And the multiplication of bread in that place would become a multiplication of his body and blood in a future dispensation, as they were ordained and eventually enabled to consecrate his body and blood. They would learn the multiplication. I had a little taste of that myself in Mass a week ago. I didn't consecrate enough hosts and had to do my own little multiplication, breaking hosts. And of course, each broken host is just as much Jesus as the whole host is. Mm-hmm. Each fragment of that host is just as much the whole Christ as a whole host is. So anyway, his teaching is never ending, and his plan for their preparation, his opening of their hearts, his formation of the apostles was very intentional and beautiful, and great to discover as you're learning, Joe, the as we read through the Gospels, there, of course, so many patterns to discover, so many insights to draw out. And in 2,000 years, we haven't exhausted all of them, and I would say we never will, because God and His intentions is beyond our imagination, or beyond our capacity even to discover. But beautiful that you're making those connections in your own linear reading rather than fragmentary reading of the Gospels.
Yeah, and I said I know there's not a ton of time left in this episode, but our international audience will recognize this thing that us Americans have, is that, you know, growing up, essentially American history is pretty linear in a positive direction. You know, we ended up as this little tiny colony, and then next thing you know, things started building upon each other. It's all going upwards. There's not like Europe, where there's an empire, it collapses, there's another one, it collapses, they go up and down all the time. And I think that going through it and trying to look at that through the apostles' perspective of, you know, there's a lot of up and down of emotions that happen over that period. You know, I never was trained to talk to a group of people that I never knew. I was a fisherman, for crying out loud, or I was a tax collector. I'm the most hated person in the world. And they all have their different ways of going about what led them to this path of going out and teaching people. And now I'm stuck with one other guy who doesn't really know what he's doing. And now we're coming back and we're saying, oh, we did some stuff right. Like this giant crowd followed us. And now that we actually have everyone here, we can't take care of them. And there just has to be so much emotion that goes through it, trying to be in that moment. I mean, you know, it's some ways it's easier knowing the end of the story. We know that Jesus was able to take care of us. In that moment, there's a lot of panic. You know, there's essentially a mob here. We just told them things are going to be awesome, and we can't even feed them. They certainly outnumber us, and literally there's nothing we can do about it. And in that moment, going through so many ups and downs and different emotions you can experience, and I'm sure all of them have felt different emotions and different severities and all that stuff. It's just something that Jesus was able to relate to all of them and all of us, and he gets it in a way that we never would. In the episode after the conversation about turning to the Eucharist and recognizing that the Eucharist is the full divinity of Jesus, and that he gets us more than we probably will even understand ourselves. So we thank you all for listening, and we will be with you again next week.